Hey folks, it's Isaline and I'm thrilled to start this WorkinSEO podcast. A podcast where we explore the diversity of career paths leading to working in SEO. We interview amazing people to learn from them and help you find your own way in your SEO career. Today, we've decided to start things upside down with a different format where I've asked my partner François to be in the interviewer seat. He has witnessed my transition into the SEO world from traditional marketing. His experience inspired me and he supported me along the way. François has co-founded the startup Monito, where he witnessed firsthand the power of organic search to reach millions of users worldwide.
Hey, let's do this. This is going to be an interesting format, and I think that's the first time where I'll be the one asking so many questions in a row. This is WorkinSEO Podcast, Episode 1, Isaline Muelhauser, SEO nerd and content strategist. What I personally like about SEO is that we find a wide range of diversity of backgrounds in this field. No one learned SEO at school, but kind of stumbled into it. Either on the job, when starting your own website, sometimes from a digital marketing or paid search background, often coming from the content side of the equation. Some people got into from an early stage of their career, some much later. This is what I like about your idea of the podcast, Isaline, and it's that there is so much to learn from others. And let's start with you. So, do you remember when you heard about the concept of search engine optimization for your first time? And where were you in your career?
I actually don't. However, I remember when I started talking about Google Analytics. And I think as a content writer, I started first with Google Analytics because I was like, I put so much effort into writing this piece of content. I want to know what's the results. And then, of course, when the result was not what I actually expected or hoped for, then I started talking about SEO. But at this point, I didn't know that it was SEO. I only knew that it was about making my piece of content better to reach a wider audience. So I think for this very first step, I was lucky to be surrounded with very experienced Google Analytics person who just guided me and explained so many different things to me.
So we already learned something that you entered SEO from the content angle or as a content writer. But let's rewind a bit. Can you describe us a bit what the various roles you had before where you are today and kind of the path that led you to writing content for the web and then learning about SEO?
Oh, yeah. I think when people ask me what is my career path and where I started, I always struggle to answer really where should I start? Should I start when I actually started earning money and it was like a job and job experience and I was doing some widely different things. And I was working in shops and I was working in hotel cleaning rooms and such things. And actually working in marketing started only later after I finished my studies, and for me these studies were really a big part because I worked a lot to financially support myself during this time. So when I had my first, I would say, real job when I was working for a festival, it was a documentary film festival. So I was in charge mainly of the website, and I think I was really passionate about these technical aspects and all of the tiny changes you can do to a website to make it like more comfortable for the users. And at this point, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was actually working on the architecture of the website to make it more user-friendly. And that was the very first, I would say, technical experience. And then I did link building in Berlin for an internship where I didn't know that I was actually doing external link building. At the time, it was called something like partnership or something of this kind. Then I did lots more writing as internal communications specialist for a big Swiss company. And that was a very, I would say, formatting experience for me to be in a very big company where there are like thousands of employees.
What we could summarize up to that point were labeled as communication roles, right?
Yes, exactly. So more or less it was communication or digital marketing something.
And then?
And then there was the web development agency. And then that was a very big step because I moved from a traditional company to a web development agency. And there I met colleagues who were passionate, each in their own types and kind also. And I remember in particular working in close hands with two designers, and I have to name them here because they've had such an impact on my life and my creativity and inspiration. They are Jeremy Fontana and Daria Gartner, and just by sharing what they liked and their own inspiration and magazines and articles, they opened my mind and they really opened doors. And for me, it was awakening. I was like, oh my God, but this is the tech world. This is what it is about. And that's where the expression tech world actually entered my words because I didn't know what it was before.
And that's within this agency that you had a transition, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is in this agency, surrounded with expert people, that I had this first conversation with the Google Analytics specialist, and I felt very pressured to do some results and perform in the role that I had in this company. And that's what drove me to look for optimization. Like, how can I do better? And how can my piece of content and anything I do for a website perform better?
And so there you were in a content writer and content strategist role, selling your service for the agency's clients. And that's from what I understand, where you had to understand how does this content fit into the strategy of your clients, and how that ultimately the goal is to gain visibility. And one of the main way that we all know now is through Google search. And so how did it help you enter the SEO world from a content perspective? And do you think it's a particularly interesting first step or background to bring to the SEO world?
In the roles I had in the agency, the way I was writing content, it was very much linked to the business objective and what the company was trying to reach as a company and what the company was trying to do on their website. So I think this is what I bring from with a background in digital marketing. It's this very wide perspective of the need of a business. And as a content strategist, I have a very deep knowledge of the different steps of a customer journey, especially as I was working in close relation with UX designers. The first step to any project is the customer journey workshop. And so I think that's the particularity of someone like me coming from this field, is that you have this intention to do something really for the business, and the website is a mean to do something for the business. And I always have this sort of overview at the back of my mind, even though I'm doing maybe a very tiny task on the website.
And obviously content and words, it's at the essence or the starting point on any SEO work, obviously starting with a keyword. And so I think having a deep experience into this, I would say even raw material of the SEO world is obviously very important or helpful entering the SEO world. And as we've discussed before, so you had a strong expertise in content, but SEO at the start was new. How did you learn about it? How did you educate yourself? What were the different steps that you made to learn on this topic?
Actually, you should be the first to remember because I started by asking you questions. And I remember one time we were in a bus going to an open air music festival. And that's when you explained, oh, this is indexing and that is crawling and this is how Google works. So I think it started with asking questions and having kind enough people around me who would answer them and also direct me to trustworthy resources and articles. And that's a big part because otherwise I would have felt really overwhelmed because I tend to feel really lost when I'm faced with something new. And I'm like, oh my God, never I can do that. And I will never learn enough and be good enough. But then step by step, a tiny response at a time, I get there.
Yeah, I definitely remember that actually. And so I think one of the direction I pointed you, and maybe that's the time for a shout out, is through all of the content that Ahrefs is producing on how to use the tool, but also that introduce you to the world of SEO and keyword research, crawling, those kind of things. And if I remember correctly, that was one of the elements where I think, like many people, how you get more into the weeds of how SEO and kind of the skills that you can learn around using these tools. Do you have anything else that you remember?
Oh, yes. I remember very precisely, and this is the first credit I have to give to someone here. Well, or maybe the second credit. It's you mentioned Izzy Smith, and Izzy Smith at this time had a website, a very rock and roll website, and she has, of course, red hair, and I could identify to that person, and I saw Izzy, and I was like, oh, but she's like me, or I'm like her. I mean, if she does it, I can do it, maybe. I can do it too. And in that moment, I realized, oh, but there are women in that field and there are people like me.
And that might be a good transition because part of this might have been seeing that it was possible and might have played a role there. So we left kind of your career path working at this agency and transitioning from doing content to learning about the performance of its content and working in SEO to make sure that the exposure of that content and visibility of that content increase. And then another big jump. It was 2019. I jumped and started a consulting service. I felt it was time to move on and to be doing what I wanted to do. And I think in the agency, it was not exactly possible to realize the job how I wanted to do because I had to follow guidelines, of course. And it's sometimes a bit easier to find clients and try maybe tasks and do your own projects when you're a consultant. So that's where I started opening many different websites, not all of them successful, but at least it was a good exercise to do all the job by myself and build something from scratch. And I think it's also at that time, I have to introduce here Sarah Mokansaye. Sarah started at the agency a bit before I left the agency, and I think we clicked. We started discussing. At first, I was very shy because, as you might know, Sarah is an extrovert and she talks a lot and very loudly, and I'm the absolute contrary. So I was really shy and very impressed. And also, Sarah comes with a more technical experience, and I think this is something I feel very strongly about, is coming from the content side of SEO. I feel like I'm never good enough and that the real good SEO are technical SEO. And so I was very impressed and I was like, oh my God, who is that woman? And actually we had a first event together during a meetup that I was organizing, Content Strategy Lausanne. And the vibe we had together and we created with this meetup, we realized that it was something special that was that made us very happy and made the audience very happy.
And this is where we started SEO Nerd Switzerland.
And so you made this jump of going solo, starting your own business and becoming a consultant. And I think many people listening would be curious. Where do you start? How did you find your first clients? How did you answer questions like how did you set your hourly rate? Those kind of things.
Well, to be honest, I was freaking out, and I'm freaking out every 2 days, even today. So I look brave and I look like I have my things together, but I think it's just that I manage how scared I am, and I put it in a box sometimes, and I'm like, okay, let's do this, even though I'm very scared. And actually, you should remember that too, because for me, the first step was to examine my financial situation, because I was very aware of the fact that as a consultant, I might not have clients and a sufficient income straight away. So we created together several Google Sheets with formulas and stuff to determine how much money I need to carry on my life and how much money I have, how long I can last if I don't have a client and such things. And this part for me was very important because coming from a very modest background, I'm very aware of what it is not to have much money and what it entails and how far I can go with that. And so I needed to feel secure on that side, because I believe that to start a company, it's not only about motivation, but the background has a great impact. I don't come from a background where it's a possible thing to start a company. I come from a background where you do your job and you are thankful to have a job. So that was the first step, to overcome this learned concept that I had from my childhood and think, no, well, I've grown today thanks to my parents and thanks to my studies. And today I'm in a situation where I can start a company. And that actually makes me very emotional, because this is not something I thought I could achieve in my life. And I think it's also not something my parents thought I could achieve. So I have many things to give to them, to the universe, to the country I live in, to you probably.
And the solution was Google Sheets, and guilty as charged. I love Google Sheets, and obviously I remember that putting numbers on papers and doing some forecast and was a big part and it's something we discussed about yesterday, about visualization. Like obviously when you forecast stuff into a spreadsheet, and I know about that having done a couple of rounds of fundraising for a startup, is that it's very hard to predict the future and you'll most of the time get it wrong, but it's a form of visualization that make it possible. And I think looking back, it's been 1.5 years now. And I think overall we can say it was a success and a good move. But how did it went, or how did you see that now?
Oh yes, I think it was definitely a success and a good move. And I think that you've just heard the real reason why I started this podcast and this whole work I'm doing with WorkinSEO, is that I know we are not all in the geographical, or we are not all in a place where we can start, and we are not all equal in face of the dreams we have. But what I've learned also thanks to the mentorship program I followed with Women in Tech SEO is that it's hard, but it's possible sometimes to overcome some learned patterns we have. And I have no impact on where you are today and of your situation. However, what I can do is bring you people who did things, to give you examples and to help you visualize the many different ways you can do things. And I do believe that SEO is a field you can enter any stage in your career, because we are all learning SEO each day. Like it's really something that you can do like self-learning.
And it's a great transition to my last chapter, which is about community, and there are two aspects of it, and it's one is participating in community, and I've been witnessing firsthand the impact of the Women in Tech SEO community started by Arej, and all the women you've been able to meet and get support from, but also give back. And I think I've been seeing how it has helped you throughout this journey by not being alone. And obviously it was also into a pandemic. And so I think having some people to discuss with and in a good environment was really, really helpful. And the other part is community organizing. And very, very early on, you started at the agency organizing a meetup about content strategy, and then another one called SEO Nerd Switzerland with Sarah. And I'm curious to hear if you can remember why did you start a meetup? Because it takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it's something that you need to do for others in order to keep you going. Obviously, you can learn a lot from it yourself, but it's kind of an act of giving back to the community. So why start a meetup, and what did it bring you?
I started Content Strategy Lausanne when I started really working on products, writing on products for clients. And I thought it was useful for me to meet other people, to meet peers who were doing something similar. And again, I was here strongly supported by Jeremy and Daria, who experienced themselves what it is like to be inspired by other people. So I think the first step was really to find inspiration together. And actually the very first meetup was watching an InVision webinar together and eating crisps and then discussing what we had learned.
And now that we're reaching the end of this podcast, can you share a little bit why this podcast and what can listeners expect from the next episodes?
So why this podcast? Because I want you to see what is possible and how widely diverse the paths are and how widely diverse the expertise of each of the SEO person is. So what you can expect in the next episodes is I have invited a very interesting crew of people who will do actually exactly the same as I did today. They will share their experience, they will share the roles they have and the specifics about these roles, like what is SEO outreach specialist, what it is like to work for a publisher, or these kind of things. So you will hear from different people. I tried to choose people from around the world with different experience, different career path. So I hope you will enjoy it. As an inspiration for you at the end of this podcast, I really encourage you to check out who is Arej Abu Ali, who are Roxana Stingu and Aleida Solis, and who is Ruth Everett. And well, I can't name everybody, but I want to give credits for women in the Women in Tech community, because if they were not there, I would not be here today because I would not feel brave enough. So thank you and see you in the next one.